Connor Bedard, Frank Nazar, and Sam Renzel will all be in action at the United Center tonight. I'll break down everything to know before the puck drops against the Red Wings.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Quick reminder to please go and show some support to Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram. I've got that account up and running again over the last month or so and have been posting some cool reels, stories, and whatnot. So make sure to go and check it out. And I also noticed recently that I'm closing in on 2,000 followers on the Locked On Blackhawks X account. That can be found at capital L, capital O, _ Blackhawks on X. And I thank you all greatly for the support. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Got a great show on tap for you all here today. But first and foremost, for the first time in nearly 6 months, we got action at the United Center tonight. After starting out with 3 consecutive road games to open up the preseason, the Blackhawks have their first bit of preseason action on home ice tonight against the Detroit Red Wings, 7 p.m. Central Time puck drop, with the game televised on CHSN, the CHSN app, and also Blackhawks.com for those of you that don't have that CHSN subscription purchase yet or aren't really interested in doing so, but could not be more excited to see action back at the United Center. And the Hawks are going to be looking for some revenge after a sloppy 3-2 loss to the Wings at Little Caesars Arena in the preseason opener last week. Go and let me know in the comment section below right now if you're going to be down at the UC tonight. Like I said, could not be more stoked to get up in the press box and watch the game. And I just wanted to take this time real quick to once again say thank you so much to everyone for all of the support over the years, to the regulars that tune into the podcast, for the people that have subscribed to help me grow. This truly pinch me type of moment that I'm going to experience tonight would not have been possible without all of you. So definitely just wanted to say how grateful I am once again here to open up today's show. But enough of that, Blackhawks fans. Let's get into everything of note before the puck drops at the UC, 7 p.m. Central Time, once again, as a reminder. And it sure looks like most of the Blackhawks' projected NHL group is going to be in action. And that really shouldn't be surprising, considering the training camp roster has now been trimmed down to just 30 players. I'll actually be talking through all of the latest roster moves that the Blackhawks made during segment 3 on today's episode, so make sure to stay tuned up until that point. But like I said, most of the NHL guys are going to be filling out the lineup here this evening. Once again, the top 6 forward group looks like it's going to be filled with Ryan Donato, Connor Bedard, and Andrei Burakovsky as the top line. I thought Bedard and Donato both picked up where they left off on Sunday against the Minnesota Wild after, establishing some really sturdy chemistry along with each other on the top line throughout, the second half, final 2/3 of the season last year. Burakovsky, I mentioned on yesterday's show, I didn't really think he had a very good first showing in a Blackhawk sweater, but looks like he's going to get another opportunity along with Bedard and Donato here this evening. Hopefully it goes better for number 28. Then on the second line, like we saw down the stretch of last season, and as we've seen all throughout training camp and the preseason thus far, it's going to be Tyler Bertuzzi, Teuvo Teravainen, and Frankie Nazar down the middle. Of course, my boy, Frank the Tank, with a hat trick. What a performance he had on Sunday, getting all of us Hawks fans fired up about what could be in store for number 91 here this season. Hopefully that trio will pick up right where they left off from Sunday's contest against the Minnesota Wild. Bertuzzi, I talked on yesterday's show about how crucial it is for him to get off to a faster start this season after being a notorious slow starter throughout his career. Blashill has made it seem like there's added focus and intensity behind Bertuzzi's training camp and the preseason thus far. That was definitely on display against the Minnesota Wild. Hopefully that happens again here this evening at the UC. And while the Blackhawks top 6 forward group, looks, things could still still change with Andre Burakovsky, right? And maybe there's a little bit of a mix-up. I doubt it, quite honestly, but it appears that the top 6 forward group is pretty set for the regular season opener against the Florida Panthers, which, by the way, Blackhawks fans, is just 1 week away. Pretty crazy how fast that is closing in, and I just really still cannot believe that that game is scheduled for 4 p.m. Central Time on a Tuesday, basically like the Cubs postseason game is here today against the San Diego Padres. But there are still spots being battled for in the bottom 6. While the top 6 looks pretty clear-cut, we know guys like Colton Dach, Ryan Green, and Oliver Moore, they're all vying to make the big league club out of camp, and they're all going to get another opportunity here in the preseason tonight. On the third line for the Blackhawks, along with Jason Dickinson and Ilya Mikheyev, is Oliver Moore. And I do think this is noteworthy, Blackhawks fans, because as I touched on a little bit on yesterday's show when diving through the updates on the training camp battles that are still being fought over, Landon Slaggert has not appeared in the preseason yet for the Blackhawks because of an injury. Blashill, talked about how he wanted to give Slaggert that opportunity along with Dickinson and Mikheyev, but quite honestly, to really no fault of Slaggert's, he's just unfortunately been unable to play. It looks like that third line left wing spot very well could be in jeopardy because Oliver Moore has definitely had a standout camp in preseason. I think his speed and his two-way play would work really well on that third line with Dickinson and Mikheyev. We saw him in that role for the Blackhawks late last year. And if Moore has another good showing here tonight, and this is his 4th preseason game, Blashill is giving him all the opportunities in the world to make this team. If he has another good showing tonight, along with Dickinson and Mikheyev, that could potentially cement his spot on the third line for that season opener against the Panthers. And then down on the fourth line here tonight against the Wings, it's going to be Captain Nick Foligno on the left wing, Colton Dach on the right wing. And as I've kind of talked through the forward lines throughout camp thus far, I do feel like Colton Dach is a better fit on the fourth line compared to Oliver Moore. I do think Oliver Moore, with his defensive prowess and that being a clear checking line along with Dickinson and Mikheyev, I really do think he fits better there than Colton Dach would, whereas Colton Dach, probably along with Nick Foligno on that fourth line, I think those two and their physicality could provide a real good energy provider down to round out this forward group. So I do think Foligno and Dach, that's a good fit with one another on that fourth line, and I've talked about how I think Dach has pretty much punched his ticket in the opening night lineup. I would expect it to probably be right there on the fourth line with Nick Foligno. And then centering the fourth line here tonight is Ryan Green. And I've talked about how between Moore and between Green, the Blackhawks clearly like Green more at this point in time down the middle. He's won 52% of his faceoffs in his first 3 preseason games. He's playing in his 4th preseason contest as well, along with Colton Dach and Oliver Moore. And I think that fourth line center spot pretty much looks like his at this point in time if he finishes up the preseason the way that he started it. And that leaves as the extra forwards tonight for the Blackhawks, the only 3 other forwards still left on the training camp roster: Landon Slaggert, Sam Lafferty, and Lukas Reichel. And while Joey Anderson technically still part of the training camp roster, but we know he's not going to play in the preseason, likely ultimately going to get sent back down to Rockford. But those 3 extras, Landon Slaggert, Sam Lafferty, and Lukas Reichel. Slaggert, by the way, is participating in practice here today, which is definitely a good sign. Hopefully he'll be able to get in one of the final 2 preseason games over the weekend. But like I said, just because Oliver Moore has been so good, I do wonder if Slaggert's opening night lineup spot has now been taken away from him. And Ryan Green, Colton Dach, I think they've shown that they're ready for the NHL level. So again, to really no fault of his own, Landon Slaggert just might be on the outside looking in at this point. One thing I do want to mention is that he, along with Green, Moore, and Dach, are all waivers exempt. Sam Lafferty, obviously, looks like he's going to be part of the NHL roster, whether it's in the lineup or as an extra. We're still not really sure. And then the other forward still left on the roster is Lukas Reichel, who I'll touch on a little bit more here in just a second during segment 2. But I'm really curious if the Blackhawks would be comfortable utilizing Sam Lafferty and Lukas Reichel as their 2 extra forwards on the NHL roster. But that would also mean sending Landon Slaggert down to the Rockford Ice Hogs of the AHL, which, isn't the worst thing in the world. He is still waivers exempt. He's not going to be picked away by another club. But I do feel like Slaggert, he's been on the pro scene for the last couple of years. He's probably ready to be an NHL regular. It's just that Colton Dach, Ryan Green, and Oliver Moore, I've thought, have had standout preseason. So it's going to be a really fascinating discussion around who's going to be the odd man out of this forward group, like I alluded to yesterday. But I do feel like Colton Dach has punched his ticket on the NHL roster. Ryan Green, I think he's a really good candidate to open up the season as the fourth line center. Oliver Moore, again, while he's probably been more standoutish than Ryan Green, I just wonder, are they going to have him in the NHL lineup right out of the gate? I think he deserves it, but just considering the entire roster makeup, I'm really interested to see how Jeff Blashill is going to handle that. And then on the defensive side of things, Ethan Del Mastro is going to be on the top pairing here tonight, along with Sam Rinzel. Alex Vlasic, we still don't really have much of an update on him other than he's day-to-day at this point in time, not practicing with the non-game group at Fifth Third Arena, isn't going to be in the lineup here tonight, like I just said. And this is a huge opportunity for Ethan Del Mastro, right? Because it hasn't been a very good start to the preseason for him through his opening 2 games. His third pairing left-handed defenseman spot could be in jeopardy at this point. Really needs a strong showing here against the Wings to kind of prove to this coaching staff that he still belongs in the NHL right out of the gate. The second pairing, it's going to be Wyatt Kaiser and Artem Levshinov, who have been attached at the hip with each other since the end of last season. They've been a pairing for the Blackhawks all throughout training camp and the preseason thus far. And it was a huge bounce back game, I think, from each of them in that win on Sunday against Minnesota. Wyatt Kaiser, we knew he was going to be part of this NHL group. Artem Levshinov's future, though, I think, still could potentially be up in the air. I do think, based on kind of what I'm hearing around the Blackhawks following a bounce back game against the Wild, he's probably going to be an NHLer right out of the jump, but a good showing here tonight against Detroit will definitely make it official. And then on the third pairing, very interesting, is Matt Grzelcyk along with Connor Murphy. And as Blashill alluded to, Grzelcyk could receive an NHL contract from the Blackhawks if some of the young defensemen struggle. And we've seen Ethan Del Mastro struggle. Obviously, Levshinov didn't get off to the best start to the preseason before responding nicely in his latest outing. But altogether, I still think, it's pretty unlikely that Grzelcyk gets an NHL deal. Also because Nolan Allen, I think, looked really good in that game on Sunday as well. And given that he's been on the pro scene for the last 2 years, I think the Hawks would much rather give him that spot than Matt Grzelcyk. But at the same point in time, I'm not completely ruling it out. I don't think Grzelcyk was all that noticeable in his first preseason game, but if he moves the puck well here tonight and makes an impact on the offensive side of things, could definitely still be in the cards. But the 3 extras who aren't playing tonight for the Blackhawks are Kevin Korchinski, Nolan Allen, and Louis Crevier. And I do still think it's decently likely that Kevin Korchinski and Nolan Allen open up the season in the AHL. I mentioned yesterday, I think Allen and Del Mastro could be battling for that final left-handed defenseman spot. How Del Mastro performs here tonight will definitely have a say in the final outcome, but I think Allen could potentially still be in that race because of his size and his physicality, whereas Kevin Korchinski, I think the Hawks are going to want to be giving him a, number 1 defenseman type of role with the Rockford IceHogs to start the 25-26 season. And then Louis Crevier, even though he's an extra, he, of all the young defensemen, aside from Wyatt Kaiser, they are the 2 that are not waivers exempt. Artem Levshinov, Sam Rinzel still could, but Kevin Korchinski and Nolan Allen all are able to go through waivers without being claimed by another team. Louis Crevier is not. So I think that, as I've been outspoken about all throughout camp, locks him into that 7th defenseman spot for the Blackhawks. So it's really between Kevin Korchinski, Nolan Allen, Matt Grzelcyk, and Ethan Del Mastro for that third pairing left-handed defenseman spot. We'll see how EDM responds here tonight in the first preseason game at the United Center. Could not be more excited to see the puck drop at the UC. But there is my quick preview of the Blackhawks lineup and everything to note before the home preseason opener. Coming up next, I'll discuss the latest Lukas Reichel trade rumors picking up once again. Stay tuned. But first, I do got to talk to you all real quick about one of today's sponsors, which is FanDuel. The NFL season is in full swing, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for every kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Because right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. And what I personally love about FanDuel is that it's super quick, it's easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to your Sundays. With player props, same game parlays, and now more ways than ever to get in on the action, are you ready to play? All you got to do is download the FanDuel app now or go and visit FanDuel.com today in order to get started. Again, that's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet and get $300 worth of bonus bets when it wins. Real quick, just a reminder to please go and smash that like button down below and to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you haven't done so already. Segment 2 here on today's episode, I broke down the latest updates on all of the Blackhawks training camp roster battles that are still going on during yesterday's show and discussed kind of who has the edge over who at this point in time. Well, in that show, I specifically mentioned that it sure looks like, along with what I just broke down in segment 1, it sure looks like Lukas Reichel is still on the outside looking in of this Blackhawks forward group and seems pretty likely to be utilized as an extra forward when the regular season begins in just 1 week's time against the Florida Panthers. And just considering, Reichel, I thought he performed really well on Saturday against the St. Louis Blues, definitely bounced back after a poor preseason opener against these very Red Wings last Tuesday. But just overall, the narrative still hasn't changed enough around Reichel. And it sounds like, he still could be available on the trade market over the next week because Scott Powers of The Athletic, he wrote up a piece yesterday saying that, everything is kind of on the table right now for Reichel, from getting traded to making the Blackhawks roster, to somehow sneaking in, to also being placed on waivers, to getting claimed by another team, to getting claimed by no one and getting reassigned to the Rockford Ice Hogs. So there's a lot up in the air for Reichel over this next 7 days. And considering, like I talked about in segment 1, with the way that Oliver Moore, Ryan Green, and Colton Dach have all been charging for NHL roster spots throughout camp and throughout training camp and the preseason thus far, it does feel like Lukas Reichel is just not really going to be given much of an opportunity once again. And talking through the Blackhawks forward group in segment 1, I mentioned the 3 extras here tonight are Landon Slaggert, Sam Lafferty, and Lukas Reichel. While I do think, Slaggert could go down to the AHL, or even more, one of he or Ryan Green could go down to the AHL as well, utilizing Sam Lafferty and Lukas Reichel as the 2 extra forwards for the Blackhawks definitely wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, even though it kind of would be for Reichel because, again, he's just not really getting much of a chance. But I also just do wonder because, again, as I talked about in segment 1, Landon Slaggert has been on the pro scene these last couple of years. He probably deserves to be a full-time NHLer at this point. There's just kind of no real clear spot for him in the lineup with Moore, Green, and Dach all ascending so much. But I do wonder if the Blackhawks would be rather comfortable utilizing Landon Slaggert as an extra forward, even though he is still kind of young. Maybe you'd want him playing consistently as opposed to getting healthy scratched every now and then, whatever the routine would be. However, I do think Slaggert is still clearly a notch below all 3 of Colton Dach, Oliver Moore, and Ryan Green, right? Like, those 3 prospects have higher priorities in this Blackhawks forward group moving forward. So maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to allow Landon Slaggert to remain practicing with the NHL guys, and B, just kind of get him ready for that role, because truthfully, I've never really pictured Landon Slaggert. Well, I do think he's a good energy provider and, does some good things in the bottom 6. To put it bluntly, I've never really considered him a true puzzle piece in this Blackhawks rebuild, whereas Oliver Moore and Ryan Green, I've always considered them as 2 potential puzzle pieces. I've never been the biggest Colton Dach guy personally, but he's definitely, taken his game to another level in this power forward type of mold. I've talked many, many times how that fills a huge void that the Blackhawks have been missing. Landon Slaggert doesn't really bring that to the table, and he doesn't have, the highest offensive ceiling in the world either. He's just a good, well-rounded bottom 6 forward. And he's probably going to be utilized as an NHL extra or as a 4th liner through the majority of their career. So I just wonder if the Blackhawks, would still feel comfortable with having Landon Slaggert in that role. However, that would mean that Lukas Reichel probably has to go because they're not going to be keeping 15 forwards on the NHL roster. They do still have to have room for 7 defensemen. So maybe that could lead to, Lukas Reichel being sent down to the AHL. But personally, I think that's just kind of a waste of time for the Blackhawks. I mean, if you're going to be sending him down to the AHL and allow someone to claim him for waivers, you might as well trade him for something in return, even if it's, like I've said in the past, a third round pick or something that doesn't really make sense for what the Blackhawks are trying to add to their rebuild. It's still better than nothing, and losing him for scot-free and through the waiver system. So I do wonder if over the next 7 days, I've talked, on the show about how I don't think trading Lukas Reichel would be the smartest thing, and selling low on him wouldn't make a lot of sense. But I've also said, keeping him around as an extra forward, I don't really think is in his best interest. And as a general manager, you do want to, be known as a guy who allows players to go in positions to succeed. You don't just want to clog somebody up and completely ruin their future. And it's pretty clear that Lukas Reichel doesn't have a future here in Chicago. So it's going to be interesting to see what winds up happening with Lukas Reichel over the next 7 days. I still think it's a little unlikely that he gets traded, but at this point in time, it's hard to expect. I shouldn't say it's hard to expect. It feels like something has to give in the Lukas Reichel camp. So very interested to see what that is going to be. Real quick, I do also have to note, Kirill Kaprizov, breaking news here this morning, signed a record 8-year, $136 million contract with the Minnesota Wild. $17 million per year for Kirill the Thrill to remain with Minnesota. Definitely did not see this one coming, Blackhawks fans. I did think, Minnesota still had a chance to resign him, but I didn't think Kaprizov was willing to sign the big ticket to remain in Minnesota long term. I expected it. If it was going to be an extension with the Wild, it was going to be like a 3 to 4 year kind of bridge deal that would allow him to hit the free agent market again in a couple of years and truly capitalize on it, especially with the way that the salary cap is going up. But, $136 million per year, apparently the Wild notched it up 1 year and $1 million more per year from their initial offer, supposedly. But obviously this takes the Chicago Blackhawks out of the Kirill Kaprizov sweepstakes, and they were listed as one of the favorites to land Kaprizov or to be the next team that Kirill Kaprizov played for. That obviously isn't going to be happening any longer, which definitely has me a little bit disappointed. I know based on the comments from the episode where I broke down a potential Blackhawks trade for Kaprizov, there are going to be some fans who aren't really that upset about it, because it certainly would have cost the Blackhawks a lot to go and pry him away from general manager Bill Guerin. But it stinks. This is another game-breaking type of winger that the Blackhawks sadly missed out on. And Mitch Marner, I never really thought had any real legs about coming to Chicago. Kirill Kaprizov, I did think there was a realistic chance, not only because of some of the rumblings that we heard from the 2024 NHL draft that I've alluded to on the show, but also just because they had the financial means, they had the intrigue of a young team in a great city, original six franchise, right? Like, there were a lot of reasons why I truly believe the Blackhawks were going to be all in on a guy like Kirill Kaprizov. He is now sadly off of the market. We're going to be seeing him in the Central Division repping a Wild jersey for a long, long time. But there is the latest on the big news on Lukas Reichel as well as Kirill Kaprizov, one a little bit bigger than the other. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, before I close out today's show, still want to break down the Blackhawks' 4th round of training camp roster cuts. Real quick, though, I first just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. And for your second listen, go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where there is no offseason, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. And you can find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3 with the Rockford Ice Hogs AHL training camp kicking off on Sunday at the BMO Center, in addition to their first preseason game actually coming in a couple of days on Thursday against the Chicago Wolves. Naturally, the Blackhawks made their 4th round of training camp roster cuts on Monday morning, assigning 4 skaters and 2 goaltenders down to the AHL level, while 1 prospect was also sent back to his respective junior club in Canada. Those 6 players that are Rockford bound or are already with the Ice Hogs for their training camp now are Drew Commesso, Ashton Coombe, Nick Lardis, Samuel Savoie, Aiden Thompson, and Mitchell Weeks. And I don't think there's any real surprises of this group, even though, Nick Lardis is definitely a notable in the Blackhawks prospect pool at this point in time. Although with his top 6 kind of skill set, there really was not much of an opportunity for him to make the NHL team. As I talked about earlier in today's episode, the top 6 for the Blackhawks is pretty clear cut to open up the regular season. So Lardis was always going to open up the year with Rockford, but I'm very excited to see if that goal scoring ability is going to translate at the AHL level. And I also want to note that I was really impressed with Lardis' speed and also the grit and toughness that he played with throughout the preseason. It was only one preseason game, but I do think his speed definitely was noticeable and how he wasn't afraid to kind of mix it up, even though he is a smaller guy and physicality is never going to be an asset of his. I do like that he wasn't afraid to kind of get into those skirmishes and throw a couple of hits out there as well. Drew Commesso, obviously going to be the number 1 starter in net for the Ice Hogs ahead of Stanislav Berezhnoi. Sammy Savoie, hope it's going to be a big season for Sammy down in Rockford, because I really do think, he could be a puzzle piece for the Blackhawks with the way that he goes about his business. Mitchell Weeks going to be the 3rd goaltender in Rockford, probably a candidate to see some games with the Indy Fuel of the ECHL. Ashton Coombe, or I don't want to leave out Aiden Thompson. He was, like Lardis, always likely to begin the season in the AHL, but along with Lardis, should be receiving a mammoth role right from the jump with the Rockford Ice Hogs. Ashton Coombe, I did want to make sure to mention that the Blackhawks, interestingly, reassigned him to Rockford instead of sending him back to his junior club, which is the Seattle Thunderbirds of the WHL. And according to Scott Powers of The Athletic, the Blackhawks are still deciding what to do with Coombe, who was a 5th-round pick in the 2025 NHL draft. Big, 6'5", 215-pound left-handed defenseman. And I actually like the story that was shared on one of the preseason broadcasts behind the Hawks drafting Ashton Coombe. Apparently, during a lot of their draft interviews with WHL players, they asked all of those guys who they think the toughest player to play against was in the WHL last season, and a good handful of them said Ashton Coombe, and they probably saw his size and his makeup. Clearly, GMKD likes having size on the back end, so that probably gave them enough confidence to go and select this kid in the 5th round. And just because of his size and being a physical, defensive-minded defenseman who, quite honestly, doesn't really have to go back to the WHL to work on his offensive skills or anything, right? He would probably be better serviced jumping into professional hockey right here, right now. He definitely has the physical makeup to go and do that. And no offense to the WHL, but the AHL is definitely the better system for players to go and develop. He'll get an opportunity to play against grown men. Still, nothing is official, by the way, for the Blackhawks, but I really do feel like putting Ashton Coombe down in the AHL kind of a la Marcel style a couple of years ago, even though it hasn't really translated well for Marcel at this point in time. As a 5th-round pick, it was pretty unlikely that he was going to make the NHL in the first place. I think it's a pretty good idea to go with Ashton Coombe along that route as well. And then I want to be sure to mention AJ Spellacy, unsurprisingly, was returned to the Windsor Spitfires of the OHL after his first preseason game on Sunday. And then Dominic Toninato, after a stellar performance to help lead the Blackhawks' comeback effort against the Blues, tallying a goal and a primary assist. He was placed on waivers by the Blackhawks on Sunday with the purpose of being sent down to the AHL, and he, along with every player in the NHL that was placed on waivers, all cleared on Monday. So Toninato has now joined the Ice Hogs for their start of training camp, and that is how the Blackhawks roster is now down to just 30 players, including 16 forwards, counting Joey Anderson, 11 defensemen, and 3 goaltenders. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube and to follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Until the next episode, everyone, go Hawks. Let's start off the year strong at the United Center, and I'll see you on tomorrow's episode.